I am back with Craig DiLouie's latest, How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive. So, this time he's exploring the nature of horror and why we're drawn to these stories. How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive is set in Hollywood in the 80s, where movie director Max has just made Jack the Knife 3, the latest in a very successful slasher franchise, but he hungers for more success and to make a horror movie that will really, really scare people. At the wrap party, he meets Sally, an actress who wants to be a star and a horror movie final girl, and the next day she takes him to an estate sale of a deceased movie director whose cast all died on the set of his last film and who lived as a recluse ever since. There, Max finds the cursed camera that the film was shot with, and he finds himself compelled to buy it and use it. Maybe he can finally make the horror film of his dreams and the stuff of true nightmares. I really enjoy this author's books. I have also reviewed Children of Red Peak, which was about Occult, and episode 13, which was about a haunted house reality TV show. While his books are fun as horror reads, he also has good pacing, characters, interesting themes and premises. And what sets his books apart a little bit are the forays into speculation or philosophy. It's not really trying to be artistic or sort of too deep or anything like that, which would probably take the fun out of the horror element of it. It's more that the author likes to play with expectation and maybe make you think a little bit or leave you to decide what the ending means sometimes. It's a nice signature to his work, in my opinion. In this book, as I mentioned above, the author is interested in why horror movies are perennially popular and why we don't want real life horror, but we do love to be scared. Why is it fun? It's also a love letter to horror cinema, with the film being the story of the horror movie from idea, pre-production, through the process to the screening of the film. The choice of setting this book in Hollywood in the 80s is quite nice. It's an era of excess and where slasher horror was big business. But in many ways, it really jumped the shark, having increasingly ridiculous and gory deaths, and sometimes making the audience laugh at the absurdity of the venture as much as scaring them. This is the era where sequels upon sequels were born, and the idea that every film needs to be bigger and better, but also mostly the same, really sort of came into play. This book explores not just the classic horror slasher of the era, but also the callous nature of sensationalizing violence, the stunts and the gore, and what they symbolize. It makes a great premise of the book. It's an homage to these movies with gore and schlock, but also pokes a cynical finger at the way, Hollywood cashes in on things, like the audience desire for more, and also the audience desensitization, that people might want to see horror movies that they think contain real life horror, maybe real deaths or real monsters, that kind of idea. So has Craig DiLouie done it again? I think this is mostly a very successful book. I don't think he goes too far in exploring why we love horror. Those of us that do love horror anyway. It could have ended up being a very dry and academic book if it was just like a treatise on the human condition or whatever. And I think the way the book covers Hollywood and the horrors of working in the industry, like the shallowness, the casting couch, getting things greenlit, all of those kinds of things is quite interesting. There's a lot of insider stuff, like how things work, mentioning or referencing other horror films. And that aspect can feel a little like Horror 101 at times, maybe a little factual, sort of Joseph Campbell stuff, which Araflex was the heaviest, what is in Max's contract. Personally, I mostly like this, but I wonder if other people will find it a little bit dull. Like, if you know a little bit about the horror genre or filmmaking in general, these are not going to be new facts to you. And if you don't know those things, it's probably because you're not interested in them. So it does make sense for the realism of the story, though, and even for the way that Max, the horror director, would think and sort of his world. So it's the story's world, after all. Makes sense. But yeah, what really does work well is that the story is a lot like a slasher film itself. Not the plotting exactly, which sort of follows the steps of making a film, with filming itself being the shortest stage, and that's the climax of this book. But we have a cast of characters that are sort of all different, fairly stock types in some ways. And we have sort of the mad scientist type, the final girl. We have gory deaths worthy of any slasher franchise. Yeah, I liked that the author managed to make Max, who is pretty sinister, and Sally, who is pretty self-absorbed, also somehow be fun to read about, and sometimes they're even quite sympathetic. I thought that was really well played. I loved the cursed camera. What a great idea that was. I don't want to tell you too much about that and sort of spoil anything, but I like how the camera sort of whispers to Max, and the story behind it feels reminiscent of a few famous cursed horror movie objects. The movie Christine or Evil Dead sort of spring to mind for me as some examples. It also feels like something you might find in Ed and Lorraine Warren's house or Zach Bagans' house. So I feel like it was a really great idea, quite a fun little motif or whatever you want to call it. I also think there's a bit more humor here than in some other Craig DiLouie books, which is a nice touch for me, and it works for the ideas of this book. Old horror films are often quite funny to watch now. The scares are pretty tame, and some of the horror films of the 80s slasher era were really meant to be darkly funny, which is something that this book talks about. Sometimes in this book, it's Max being cynical or someone dropping like a funny one-liner or something like that. And other times there's a gleeful dark tone in a scene, or the way that something turns out ironically or doesn't work out for someone that's very funny. Or even the way the author pokes fun at Hollywood and its shallowness. I think that's something that worked really well here, and it wasn't overused. It was more just sort of, added like salt on top of popcorn. So on the whole, I enjoyed this one. I love horror movies and I love slasher movies, and this book kind of reads like one. I also love old Hollywood stories and lore, so that was up my alley as well. I think this is a fun read. I do think some people may not love the sort of facts peppered in there. It might be a little dry for some people, but the deaths and the gallows humor might make up for that. So yeah, I think this one should please most horror fans, especially if you like slasher movies. I would definitely recommend this book for you. And if you're a fan of the author, I think you're going to like this one as well. Yeah, so get your hands on that one if it appeals to you. And thank you to the publisher who sent me a copy of this book to review and share with you guys. You can check out some of my other videos. I also have another channel and socials, so you can find links below if you want more of that. And if you want to hang out again, remember to like and subscribe. And you can always leave a comment, let me know what you thought, or let me know what else you might want to see. Thank you.